So today we're talking about sumo deadlift setup and the optimal hip position in order to have an efficient and effective pull off the floor. Quite often you hear the idea that you have to try and get your hips closer to the bar in a sumo deadlift. This is 100% correct, because what it does is it decreases the amount of hip extension force that you need to lock a lift out, which is what we want. We want to try and minimize our moment arm so that we can produce as least force as possible to execute the deadlift. So with this idea of getting the hips closer to the bar, what we unfortunately see a lot with beginners is when we say this, is that the idea that they create in their head is that they just have to pull their hips underneath them and almost just try and roll their hips towards the bar. So what this will look like is this: they'll set up in their position, they'll pull the slack, and then in an effort to get their hips closer to the bar, they'll end up just rolling underneath. This is when we start to get a very flexed spinal position. And yes, it has achieved the idea of getting the hips closer to the bar. However, the way that we've gone about this is through spinal flexion, which is not what we want, especially when deadlifting heavy weights. So the idea that we sometimes drive, and I've stolen this term from Greg Robbins over at Cressy Sports Performance, is the idea that you have to try and wedge your hips into the bar. So if you think about a wedge and a wedge-shaped object, being the hips, what we need to try and do is as we pull slack out of the bar, we need to drive our entire back and hips into the bar whilst opening the knees up, so into abduction. So we're driving the hips forward and the lower back and the entire back into the bar, whilst simultaneously drawing our knees out and abducting our knees. So what this actually looks like is we set ourselves up in the same position. We come down, we start to pull our slack, but as I start to pull my slack, I'm thinking about pushing my back into the bar and driving my knees out. And we can see with that, we've achieved the exact same thing of moving the hips closer to the bar. However, we've maintained a neutral spine, and we've also held the integrity of our pelvis and our hip extensor muscles without rolling the pelvis underneath you. So the two will look like this. Number one, which is what we don't want, is we set ourselves up, we pull the slack, and then in an effort to get our hips closer to the bar, we just roll underneath. That will be number one. That's not what we want. When number two, the idea of wedging, this is when we come down into the bar, we pull the slack out, and then I wedge my back into the bar and my hips into the bar and force my knees out. And that's the position that we're actually trying to achieve when we go through our sumo deadlift. So that's all there is today, just a quick little technique tip for your sumo deadlifts. If you enjoyed this video or you took anything out from it, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. Also, there's fresh content out weekly, so make sure you keep an eye on us. Our social links are in the description box below, www.melbournestrengthculture.com. Happy lifting and welcome to the culture.